How's it going, guys? It's Hansel here. In this segment, I'll be going over my new talent and glyph choices, along with the new stat priority for fire mages in patch 5.4. So let's get started. Alright, first things first, we're going to start off with the talents. In the first tier, I like to take Presence of Mind. Presence of Mind is particularly good with instant CCs with spells such as Polymorph, Ring of Frost, and Frostjaw. Especially with Frostjaw because I like to use it to set up with deep freezes from range. Normally to deep freeze as a fire mage you need to go up to your target and frost nova them, but with the Pawn Frostjaw setup you can catch your enemies off guard and deep freeze from far away. In Battlegrounds I still like to take Blazing Speed sometimes for more mobility and an overall more control of the environment. In the next tier I like to take Temporal Shield. I used to be in love with Ice Barrier. It's a nice shield and without it I kind of felt naked, but once I got used to using Temporal Shield I realized that there's much more potential with this ability, much more potential than Ice Barrier will ever have. If used correctly it can actually heal about 300,000 HP back to you, whereas Ice Barrier will only absorb 50k in arenas with Battle Fatigue. Without Battle Fatigue it absorbs almost 100k, but still compared to Temporal Shield it's nothing. It does take a few weeks it took me a few weeks to actually master it and get used to it, and I'm still practicing with it, but you just have to know when damage is coming and preemptively use it. Next up, like I said before, is Frostjaw, so I can set up from range, but in group fight situations you can still take Ring of Frost for AoE CC. Next up is a no-brainer, Cold Snap to get 2 ice blocks, and I like to also use it to set up with Frost Novas and reset the cooldown of it. For the bomb tier, most of the time I like to take Living Bomb. It's probably the best damage dealer out of all of them, except for maybe Nether Tempest, but the only downside of it is that it can only go up to 3 targets at once. In some group fight situations in RBGs, I sometimes like to take Nether Tempest because it does just as much damage as Living Bomb, but it can go up to a limited amount of players, so you can spread it to like 10 people if you want to. The only downside for this talent is that it can keep you stuck in combat, so if you're in RBG situations where you actually have to peel out and actually float, then don't use this talent. Last but not least is Incanter's Ward. This is probably a no-brainer as well. Compared to the other spells in this tier, Incanter's Ward wins it, and I like to use this before setting up with deep freezes for 15% more spell damage. In the glyphs, it's pretty simple. Of course, deep freeze glyph, so enemies can't shapeshift or freedom out of your Nova before you actually get the deep freeze off. Next one is Polymorph to actually take off all dots from them when you poly them. And for the last one, most of the time I like to take Armor's Glyph versus melee because I get 10% less damage taken. But versus casters, I like to use Ice Block Glyph because once Ice Block comes off, you're immune to all spells for 3 seconds, and it also Frost Novas your enemy if they're around you, which allows you to set up off of it. Versus Affliction Locks, I like to use Remove Curse because you can remove a curse and it gives you 15% more spell damage after removing the curse for 10 seconds. What I like to do versus Affliction Lock 3v3 teams is use Remove Curse to take off the dots and get this 15% damage buff, and also Incanter's Ward right before it to get another 15%. So that's pretty much a 30% damage increase right there before setting up in deep freezes. Versus 1v1 mage fights, you can take Glyph of Spell Steal, which will heal you every time you spell steal for 5% of your maximum health, which is really good because versus mage fights you're going to be spell stealing a lot. Alright, next up we're going to go over the new stat priority for fire mages. It's changed a little bit since last patch, so yeah, here we go. First of all, obviously you want to have 6% hit chance so you don't miss. After that you want to get 12.51 haste. After on you're going to stack crit as much as possible, and then PvP power, then mastery. First things first, when it comes to haste, the reason you want 12.51% haste is because it's a new haste breakpoint. Before we weren't actually able to reach this breakpoint, but now we're getting new pieces of gear and they have more stat bonuses to them, which makes it possible to reach this haste breakpoint. So if you don't know what a haste breakpoint is, it's when your dots reach another breakpoint where you get another tick from the dot. So say for example if Living Bomb ticked 8 times, but if you reach the haste breakpoint it ticks 9 times, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it definitely adds up, especially when you're multi-dotting people, and it helps out with your overall damage. Keep in mind for Living Bomb it's 12.51, but for Nether Tempest it's 12.55. If you're having troubles reaching this haste breakpoint, you can use certain gems that I've been using. Right now I'm using the yellow gem called the Reckless Vermilion Onyx. It gives 80 intellect and 160 haste. Right now I'm a little bit over the haste breakpoint because first of all I got a new piece this week and I didn't reforge it yet. And I'm gonna test a new build, and instead of going mastery, I'm gonna reforge all my mastery into crit and haste. Because mastery for fire mages is very, very weak, because mastery, it increases our dot damage for fire mages, and right now in Mists of Pandaria we're not a dot class. Like, we may have dots and stuff, but we revolve around bursting and deep freezes and getting those quick kills, which haste and crit comes in handy for. Anyways, that's everything for now. Hopefully everything made sense, and only a little bit has changed, but once you adapt to these new changes, I can guarantee you success as a fire mage in PvP. So keep burning shit.